So Jess, I have another interesting thought experiment to follow up on the simulation argument. It tends to get discussed by the same sorts of philosophers and computer scientists, and it uses a lot of the same kind of reasoning. So we should talk about it. It's called the doomsday problem, and the typical way that it gets laid out is this. We don't currently know how long the universe is going to last. We don't know how many creatures are going to exist in the universe. But it's fair to say that there's an exponential trajectory of beings in the universe, because that's how reproduction works. And so the doomsday argument is, given an exponential graph of any size, if you don't know at what point in the graph you are, like you don't know at what point on the timeline you're currently existing, but you can say that that most of the beings in the universe exist towards the end of the universe, because that's the nature of an exponential curve. So given that we don't know where on that curve we are, we don't know what percentage of the universe has already passed relative to what's to come, we should think of ourselves as being sort of randomly drawn from some point on that timeline. Like randomly drawn out of all the people who have existed and will exist in the universe. And since most of those people exist towards the end of the timeline, because there's more area under the curve there, then it's likely that we're towards the end of the lifespan of the universe.
Interesting.
You like it? All right. Unless you want to respond now, I can give you a counter argument.
Yeah. What's the
So there's
the clear challenge that we're not necessarily purely exponential.
Well, so that's one consideration. Another reason that this might not apply, to reality is that we do have more information than that. It's like if all we knew was that we are conscious entities in a universe and that reproduction is exponential, then maybe we'd have more of a problem. But we know more than that. We know how much space there is left on the Earth. We know, I guess, the likelihood of life on other planets. So we can if we know that there's still a lot more space and resources left in the universe, then we don't have to fall back on the doomsday argument, right? We can
Right.
actually reason about how many more generations the universe could support. But I think that's a less interesting way to think about it. I'd rather think about what if we didn't know all that? What if all we knew were those former things? But so there's another way to look at it. The original doomsday argument uses what Nick Bostrom has called the self-sampling assumption, which is what I was referring to about assuming that you're sampling, given that you don't know where on the timeline you are, you're assuming that you're
point of view from all of these potential points of view.
Yes, exactly. So that's what leads to the doomsday conclusion that probably we're towards the end, because that's where most of the people are. But an alternate way to look at it involves what's called the self-indication assumption, and that gives the opposite result. So the self-indication assumption is conditional on the fact that I exist. I should be more confident in hypotheses that posit a lot of beings existing than hypotheses that posit a smaller number of beings existing. So if you imagine two possible worlds, like we're in one of these possible worlds, we don't know which one is the actual world. And one of the possible worlds has 1 trillion times more beings in it than the other possible world. Well, then it's more likely that we're in the world with 1 trillion beings. So basically we're sampling ourselves from the space of all possible beings, I guess. And if most of those possible beings are in one world, then we're probably in that world. And so if you apply that to the doomsday argument, then it's more likely that we're in a universe with far, 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 far more total beings, which means that there are probably many more beings to come after us. Does that make sense?
I always get skeptical when we start talking about possible worlds as evidence.
Yeah.
And so I'm throwing up red flags, although I don't know quite where to attack. the doomsday hypothesis yet.
Wait, let me read the actual. I want to make sure I got the self-indication assumption right. Okay, so it's given the fact that you exist, you should, other things equal, favor hypotheses according to which many observers exist over hypotheses on which few observers exist.
And why would that be? What justification, what makes us more confident in a hypothesis in which there are many versus just one or just a few?
Well, I guess the idea is that you had more chances to be created.
So,
that
does
doesn't
the
sound right.
Anthropic principle come into play here? That we're trying to predict the probability of some of things being the way they are, but without much knowledge of the probabilities beforehand, let alone the fact that we happen to have existed, and therefore we're sort of going at it backwards. Instead of saying, given all the different possibilities, what are the chances that this would happen? We should be saying, given that this is happening, what can we take from it?
Well, okay, so this is definitely anthropic reasoning. It's reasoning about what is the case, conditional on the fact that we exist. Let me try to find a way to argue for the self-indication assumption. Well, okay, all right, how about this? Let's say you are one of 1,000 people. You can't see the other people. But you're told, let's say you're all being held hostage, and the murderer tells you that he's going to flip a coin, and if it's heads, he's going to kill 10 people. And if it's tails, he's going to kill 900 people. And so he's going to do this while you're all asleep. He puts you to sleep. You wake up in the morning, you're alive. Should you think it's more likely that the coin came up heads or tails, given the fact that you're alive? Is that, You see the similarity, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's two possible states of the world. One with 990 people and one with only 100 people. And so it seems like...
Given that you woke up,
Yeah.
you're supposed to judge the likelihood that the coin came up heads or tails. Now, this sounds a lot like something that's been argued over on the Less Wrong blog about the Sleeping Beauty case.
Oh, yeah. There's this cluster of related problems, and so we started in the simulation argument, and we went over to Doomsday, but we could easily turn right and go to Sleeping Beauty, and yeah.
I'm having trouble with it, honestly. It does seem like we should say that there's a 50% chance that the coin landed heads or tails, and we happen to have been a lucky one of the 10 out of 9, or 100 out of 1,000. But the fact that we woke up, if we didn't wake up, then we wouldn't be around to observe. And so...
I mean, one thing that's different about this compared to the Doomsday argument, like self-indication assumption applied to the Doomsday argument, is that we already existed before the coin flip. So it's like there was like a branch. So like there was an actual world, and then it branched into two possible worlds, one of which was actual, but we don't know which one. Whereas with the universe, with the theories about which universe we're in, that sounds wrong. The theories about which of the possible universes is the actual one, there was never an original actual world that branched into two possibilities. We're reasoning about like two separate universes. Two separate possible universes. We need new vocabulary, because every way I say it, it sounds like I'm talking about like actual coexisting multiple universes, but I'm not. I'm talking about possibilities. They just, like, one of them is actual. We just don't know which one. But that doesn't mean, that there isn't an actual one. Okay, well, let me give you one sort of reductio ad absurdum of the self-indication assumption.
Oh, good. Already sounds absurd. As I try to wrap my mind around it.
I know. This is also from Nick Bostrom. It's a thought experiment called The Presumptuous Philosopher. I'll read it to you. He says, so it's the year 2100. and physicists have narrowed down the search for a theory of everything to only 2 remaining plausible candidate theories, T1 and T2, using considerations from super-duper symmetry, I don't know, some advanced physics. According to T1, Theory 1, the world is very, very big but finite, and there are a total of a trillion observers in the cosmos. According to Theory 2, the world is very, very, very big but finite, and there are a trillion observers. The super-duper symmetry considerations are indifferent as between these 2 theories. Physicists are preparing a simple experiment that will falsify one of the theories. Enter the presumptuous philosopher. Hey guys, he says, it is completely unnecessary for you to do the experiment because I can already show you that Theory 2 is about 1 trillion times more likely than Theory 1, whereupon the philosopher runs the argument that appeals to the self-indication assumption. So would we award the Nobel Prize to the philosopher because he's just shown that, there's barely a snowball's chance in hell that Theory 1 is true? This seems...
I think pretty clear, no.
Like, Bostrom takes this to be a reductio ad absurdum. Like, this is absurd, therefore the self-indication assumption can't be true. Other philosophers actually, bite the bullet and say, okay, we should give the philosopher the Nobel Prize then.
Right. The argument of one man's modus ponens is another man's modus tollens. That it just, when 2 views conflict, the question is which one do you throw out? If this idea is right, then we should award him the Nobel Prize. Clearly we shouldn't award him the Nobel Prize, so
the idea can't be right.
Or you could go the other way. Well,
I guess we should award him the Nobel Prize. Right.
I'm having trouble accepting it. It really seems like we're still going backwards from possible worlds where we're not around to think about the probability towards our own experience instead of starting from our experience and moving from there. And so my intuition tells me that that's where the problem is.
It just occurred to me that the thought experiment I proposed with the killer who either kills a few or most of the inhabitants, you could make it a little more similar to the doomsday argument if you just said, you know that you exist, you don't know how many other people exist, but you know that at some point, I don't know, let's say this is the future and people can create human beings, like manufacture them, and the killer decide...
unlike in 9 months.
What?
You mean unlike over a 9-month span?
Okay, we can make this realistic. Let's say that some king decided he was going to flip a coin, and if it was heads, he was going to recruit a bunch of women to give birth to... Man, this is getting ridiculous. He's going to recruit a bunch of women to give birth to 100 babies, and if it was tails, he's going to recruit women to give birth to 1,000 babies. You're a baby, you were raised in isolation, you don't know how many other people exist, but can you reason about how the outcome of the coin? So in this case, it's not that you existed prior to the coin flip, and now we're wondering what state of the world you're in. Like, these beings didn't exist before the coin flip, but the reasoning still seems to hold, to the degree that it does.
Right. No, it does seem like a parallel setup. And
right.
One that makes it a little bit clearer. I still think that from your point of view, you have no evidence that would point you in either direction, given your set of experiences.
I know, but...
I know.